The afternoon sun rested softly over the school courtyard when she first walked in quiet, unnoticed, almost blending into the warm colors of the day. She didn't rush. She didn't look around much. She simply moved with small, steady steps, as if she were trying not to disturb the space around her. Her backpack hung loosely on her shoulder, worn and simple, and her hair fell slightly over her eyes. Giving her a shield, she didn't have to hold up with her hands. She wasn't new to the school, not really. She had been there for weeks now, maybe even months. But she still felt like someone drifting along the edges of a place she hadn't fully stepped into. Most students barely noticed her. They were too busy with friends, noise, and the rush of their own small worlds. She didn't mind. She wasn't the type to jump into anything quickly. The quiet made sense to her. Silence was a place she knew how to live in. Inside the main building, the air felt cooler. Students hurried past her with laughter and loud footsteps, but she simply watched them move, her expression calm, unreadable. She carried a small notebook with her, pressed between her elbows and her ribs, as if the pages inside held something important, something too personal to let go of. She made her way toward the far end of the hallway where most people didn't go unless they had a reason. There, tucked behind a door with chipped paint, was a small music room, a space she had found by accident one day when searching for somewhere quiet to rest. The first time she discovered it, she walked in expecting nothing special. But standing in the corner of the room was an old, upright piano. Its wood faded, its keys slightly yellowed, and its bench a little uneven. But even in its worn state, she felt something warm when she saw it. Like a soft memory pressing gently at the edges of her mind. She hadn't touched a piano in years. Not since she was a child. Not since life changed in ways she still didn't know how to speak about, but the sight of the piano made something inside her pause and breathe differently. And so, over the past weeks, she found herself returning to this room more often, not to play. Not at first, but simply to sit near the instrument. To listen to the soft hum of the building, to let the smell of old wood and faint polish wrap around her like a quiet blanket. Today, though, felt slightly different. She opened the door gently, closing it behind her with care so the sound wouldn't echo through the hallway. The room was empty, the sunlight falling through the window in a soft rectangle across the piano. She placed her notebook on a chair near the wall and approached the piano the same way she always did, slowly, as if she were approaching a memory. She slid onto the bench, sitting upright but not tense. Her fingers rested on her lap for a moment, hesitating. Her chest rose and fell with a quiet breath. Then, without letting herself overthink, she lifted her hands and touched a single key. A soft note rang out. Her heart tightened. She pressed another key gentler. This time, listened as the sound floated into the room. It wasn't perfect. The piano was old. Some keys were slightly out of tune, but that didn't matter, for her. The sound was familiar enough to feel like home. She played a few more notes, letting her fingers move slowly across the keys. She wasn't playing a song. She wasn't even sure what she was doing. It was like her hands were searching for something, tracing shapes in the air that only she could feel. After a moment, she paused and pulled her hands back onto her lap. She didn't know why this simple act made her feel so full, both warm and heavy at the same time. She closed her eyes. A memory surfaced. A small living room. A soft lamp. A much younger version of herself sitting beside someone she loved deeply, hands guiding hers across clean white keys. Laughter, warmth, music. Then the memory faded, soft around the edges, like something fragile that she didn't want to hold too tightly. She opened her eyes again, just as she was about to close the piano lid and leave. The door creaked open. She turned sharply, startled. A tall figure stood in the doorway, a teacher she had seen around the school. His voice was quiet and gentle. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you. I heard the piano. I didn't think anyone was in here." She didn't speak. The teacher stepped inside slowly, sensing her discomfort. "You've been coming here often, haven't you?" he asked softly. She looked down at her hands and gave the smallest nod. The teacher smiled kindly. "Do you play?" Her throat tightened for a moment. She lowered her gaze and whispered, barely audible, "A little." "It sounded more than a little," the teacher said warmly. She shook her head gently. "I was just touching the keys. Not really playing." He didn't push. Didn't ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. Instead, he stepped back toward the door. "Well, if you ever feel like really playing, you're welcome to use this room anytime. It's usually empty." She nodded quietly. The teacher paused before leaving and added something she didn't expect. "Sometimes the music we think we lost is actually waiting for us." Then he left. She sat frozen for a moment, unsure why those words stayed with her. She turned back to the piano. Her fingers hovered above the keys, then dashed slowly. Gently, she played a small series of notes. Just a few, but this time, they felt like the beginning of something. She left the music room a little later, closing the door quietly behind her. As she walked down the hallway, her footsteps felt lighter. Her heart felt different, not full, not empty, but awake. She didn't tell anyone about what happened. She didn't have to, because deep inside, something had shifted, something small, something soft, something important. And she knew she would return tomorrow, maybe to play, maybe to remember, maybe to find the part of herself she thought she had lost. Whatever the reason, she already felt the pull, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't resist it. The moment she played that next soft chord, something in the air shifted, though she didn't notice it. The sound wasn't loud or bold, but it carried a quiet strength, the kind that made people pause without even realizing why. She didn't look at anyone around her. She didn't look up at all. Her eyes stayed on the keys, her hands moving slowly, almost cautiously, as if she was afraid the music would disappear if she pressed too hard. The room behind her was still full of people talking, drinking tea, moving around, but the energy had changed in a small way. A few people near the piano lowered their voices. One of the older women who had been painting turned her head, listening with a soft tilt of her chin. A couple of children stopped in their tracks as the melody touched the air, pulling their attention toward the instrument that had been ignored all afternoon. She didn't see any of this. Her world had narrowed to the piano in front of her, to the familiar shapes beneath her fingertips. Her left hand pressed a few gentle notes while her right hand moved ahead, adding depth to the sound. It was nothing complicated, nothing fancy. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't even trying to play a full song. She was simply letting her hands remember the language they used to speak fluently. The first few notes felt shaky, like they might fall apart at any moment. But as she continued, something deep inside her began to settle. The tension in her shoulders softened. Her breathing slowed. Her fingers trembled less with each chord. She pressed a combination of notes that formed the opening of an old melody she once played often, one that held the warmth of afternoons, sitting beside someone who believed in her. The music was slow and gentle, filled with emotion she didn't speak out loud. The room started to lean into the sound, even though no one wanted to break the moment by saying anything too clearly. Someone whispered, "She must be trained." Another person replied quietly, "No, it feels more natural than trained." A small group near the back tilted their heads, curious but not moving closer yet. The young woman at the piano didn't notice any of it. She had slipped into a space where sound replaced thought, where the world around her felt distant, like a soft blur. Her fingers moved to another chord, carrying more confidence this time. And the melody expanded just a little, like a flower slowly opening its petals. A boy walked closer to her, holding a cookie in one hand, but forgetting to take a bite. He stared at her fingers with wide eyes. His mother whispered his name gently, telling him not to get too close, but he didn't listen. He was drawn in by the sound, by the calm way she played. The young woman finally noticed him. For a moment, her fingers froze above the keys, and she blinked as if waking from a dream. The boy smiled shyly. "Keep playing," he said in a small voice. She gave him a tiny, unsure nod. She wasn't used to being asked for anything. Her heart fluttered with a mix of nervousness and something softer, something warm, so she placed her fingers back on the keys and continued. This time her melody grew smoother. The hesitation faded little by little. She allowed herself to feel the music instead of questioning it. Her hands moved naturally, remembering old patterns, old emotions, old stories that once lived in the sound. She played a small progression, then shifted it slightly, giving it her own touch. She didn't think about it. She didn't plan it. It simply happened, the way breathing happens when the body is calm. Behind her, more people turned their heads. A group of teenagers stopped near the snack table, surprised by the unexpected beauty. One of them reached for their phone but lowered it again, afraid of ruining the quiet moment. A couple walking by paused mid-step, exchanging a look before quietly drifting toward the piano. Still, she didn't see any of them. Her mind drifted back to memories she thought she had buried. She saw a workshop filled with wooden tools. She saw a pair of warm hands guiding hers on the piano keys. She heard a gentle voice telling her she had a gift, even when she doubted herself. She heard laughter, soft corrections, patient encouragement. She felt her chest grow tight, but it wasn't painful. It was the ache of remembering something beautiful that she had locked away. For too long, her fingers slowed as she reached a softer part of the melody. The notes were fragile, almost whispering. The room responded in its own quiet way. Conversations dipped again. Footsteps softened, and even the children grew calmer. Sensing the delicate moment unfolding, one of the volunteers turned off the microphone humming at the front. Not because it was needed, but because the music deserved a quieter space. A few people moved closer, though they kept a respectful distance. They didn't want to disturb her, didn't want her to stop. She still didn't realize any of this. Her world was the piano. Her fingers brushed, a new set of notes. Ones that carried a slightly different tone. The melody shifted into something deeper, a little stronger, as if she was speaking through the keys now instead of simply remembering. The chord progression tightened and flowed more clearly. Gaining shape and direction, people began to feel the emotion inside the music, even if they didn't know the story behind it. Some felt peace. Others felt nostalgia. A few felt a strange sense of connection to a stranger who hadn't even looked up yet. A woman near the back whispered, "It feels like she's telling a story." Someone beside her nodded, a very personal one. The boy who stood closest to her sat cross-legged on the floor now, his cookie forgotten completely. He leaned slightly forward, careful not to touch the piano. Watching her move her hands with fascination, the young woman playing still didn't look up, but she felt something change. She couldn't explain it. She couldn't point to anything specific. But the air around her felt different. It felt warm, attentive, almost supportive in a way she wasn't used to. The music she played felt like it belonged not just to her, but to the room. She played a deeper chord, letting it ring longer than the others. The sound filled the space around her, and as it began to fade, she moved into a lighter run of notes that floated like small waves. She wasn't performing. She wasn't trying to show skill. She was simply feeling. Her hands shifted to a familiar pattern, one that always reminded her of early mornings spent practicing beside someone who believed in her more than she believed in herself. She slowed the tempo slightly, letting each note breathe, letting the sound linger just long enough for the room to absorb it. A small group of people gathered behind her, now some standing. Others leaning against tables, a few taking slow breaths, as if the music had calmed something inside them. Still, she kept playing. One of the older men whispered softly, "It's been years since I heard someone play with that kind of feeling." Another nodded silently, his eyes fixed on her hands. The young woman's fingers glided across the keys with more confidence. The melody grew fuller again. The quiet strength inside her began to rise, though she didn't even notice. She was lost in the sound, lost in the connection between her heart and her hands. Someone near the back finally lifted their phone. Not to interrupt, but to capture the moment. They didn't zoom in. They didn't move closer. They simply held the phone still and recorded from afar. Wanting others to hear the beauty they were hearing, the melody climbed gently, then dipped, then climbed again in a soft swell that made a few people take deeper breaths. The boy near the piano leaned his chin into his hands. Completely captivated, The young woman herself felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, though she didn't let them fall. She pressed into the next chord, one that always reminded her of everything she had lost and everything she had kept hidden. Her throat tightened, but she didn't stop playing. Instead, she let the emotion flow through her fingers. The music softened again, fading into a delicate series of notes that felt like fragile footsteps in a quiet room. A hush spread across the space, not because anyone demanded silence, but because the music created it naturally. People who had been laughing earlier now stood quietly, drawn into the atmosphere she unknowingly created. She shifted to another chord, warm, steady, full. The sound wrapped around her like a comforting presence, reminding her of hands guiding hers long ago. She took a small, shaky breath. Then slowly, gently, she lifted her hands from the keys. The final note lingered in the room, floating for a moment before dissolving into silence. The silence was different this time. It wasn't empty. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't cold. It was full of emotion, full of recognition, full of something shared. She finally looked up, and she froze. Dozens of eyes were on her. People stood in a half-circle behind her, some with soft smiles, some with teary eyes, some simply watching her with quiet awe. The boy near her looked up at her with admiration, his face bright with excitement. For a moment, her heart stopped. Her breath caught in her throat. She didn't know whether to stand up, apologize, or run. But then something unexpected happened. People began to clap, not loudly, not wildly, not in a way that startled her. It was gentle, warm, respectful, a soft wave of appreciation. She blinked, stunned. Her hands trembled slightly on her lap. A woman stepped forward, offering a warm smile. "That was beautiful," she said softly. Someone else added, "You have a gift?" The young woman didn't know what to say. Words felt distant, slippery. Her chest was tight with emotion she didn't know how to express. She looked back at the piano, then at the people, then at her hands. She had come here expecting to stay, invisible. She hadn't expected this, and she had an idea that this was only the beginning of what her music was about to bring into her life. When the applause faded into softer murmurs, she sat frozen on the piano stool, unsure of what to do next. The gentle clapping had warmed the room in a way she wasn't prepared for, and now the silence felt almost too large. She stared at her hands, still trembling slightly, as people continued whispering kind things behind her. She wasn't used to attention. She wasn't used to praise. She wasn't used to eyes turned in her direction. For a moment, she wanted to disappear. She wanted to stand up and slip out of the hall quietly the way she had slipped in. But something in the room held her. Not pressure, not expectation, but a strange warmth that felt almost like a blanket placed around her shoulders. The little boy who had been sitting close to her tugged gently at her sleeve. "Can you play more?" he asked softly. His eyes were hopeful, honest. That simple question softened something inside her chest before she could answer. One of the volunteers, an older woman with soft eyes and gentle hands, stepped forward with a smile. "Only if you want to," she said. Her tone wasn't pushy. It wasn't demanding. It was kind in a way that made it easy to breathe. The young woman nodded slowly, not because she felt ready to play again, but because she didn't want to shut out the kindness being offered to her. She took a quiet breath, then stood from the piano stool carefully. Her hand shook slightly as she reached for her small bag, not knowing whether she should sit somewhere else or stay nearby. But before she could even take a step, the older woman gently touched her arm. "You don't have to leave," she said softly. The young woman looked at her in confusion for a moment, then lowered her eyes again. She wasn't sure how to respond. Her life had been filled with long stretches of silence. Silence not just in sound, but in connection. She hadn't expected anyone to welcome her so openly. "Come," the woman said, guiding her to a nearby table. "Have some tea. You must be tired." The young woman followed her quietly. People stepped aside politely, giving her space, not crowding her. A few smiled gently as she passed. Their faces weren't filled with curiosity or judgment, just appreciation. She sat down at the table, her bag still held in her lap like a shield. The woman placed a warm cup of tea in front of her. Steam curled upward, carrying a soft scent that reminded her of evenings when life used to feel full and safe. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're welcome," the woman replied, sitting beside her. "Do you live nearby?" She nodded faintly. "Not far. Do you usually come to our community days?" "I don't think I've seen you before." She shook her head. "First time." The woman smiled, understanding more than the young woman said. "Well, I'm glad you're here, and I'm very glad you touched that piano." Small, shy breath left her lips. She looked down at her cup. "I didn't plan to." "Sometimes the things we don't plan turn out to be important," the woman said. The young woman didn't respond, but the words stayed with her. Across the room, people drifted back to their activities. Some continued painting, others grabbed snacks, and a group of children gathered near the piano, tapping random keys that filled the room with tiny scattered notes. No one played a full melody, but even those little sounds felt lighter than before. The young woman took a sip of her tea. It warmed her chest gently, grounding her. As she held the cup, she noticed her hands had stopped shaking. For the first time in a long while, she felt something settle inside her, something steady. A volunteer came by with a clipboard. "We're starting the small group music session soon," he said with a friendly grin. "Anyone who wants to join is welcome. You don't even need experience. It's just for fun." He looked at her briefly, not in a pushy way, but with a hint of encouragement. She didn't say anything, but she gave a polite nod. The woman beside her leaned closer. "You should join," she said softly. "You don't have to perform. Just be part of it." The young woman hesitated. "I don't know. It's relaxed." "Nothing serious," the woman assured her. "You could even help others if you want. You have a gentle way of playing. It might make people feel safe." Safe. That word felt heavy, important. She took another breath, then nodded slowly. "I'll try. That's all anyone can ask." The small group session began forming near the front of the hall. People took seats in a loose circle, some with small instruments like tambourines and hand drums. A volunteer rolled out a cart with more instruments: bells, shakers, small wooden sticks. The piano remained open, keys exposed, waiting. The young woman approached the circle quietly. She didn't sit near the front, but she didn't hide in the back either. She chose a seat along the side, close enough to participate, but not too close to feel overwhelmed. The group leader, cheerful man with a bright voice, greeted everyone. "All right, everyone. Today we're just going to play around with sound. No pressure, no rules. Just feel the rhythm and enjoy yourselves." People smiled and laughed lightly. The young woman kept her gaze lowered. The leader handed out small instruments. A little girl beside her offered her a shaker. "Here," the girl said. "You can use mine." She accepted it with a soft thank you, feeling the small beads rattle inside as she held it. The leader began tapping a gentle rhythm on a hand drum. "Just follow along," he said. People joined in slowly. Some were offbeat, some too fast, some too slow. But it didn't matter. The sound of scattered instruments filled the room with a lively, imperfect charm. The young woman shook the instrument gently. The soft sound blended with everything else. She watched the group, noticing how even the shyest people seemed to loosen up with each passing moment. Music, even simple music, had a way of dissolving barriers. As the rhythm continued, the leader nodded toward the piano. "Anyone want to add a little melody?" he asked. People looked around, but no one stepped forward. The young woman's heart beat faster. She didn't want to draw more attention to herself, but something inside her tugged softly. The leader noticed her. "Only if you're comfortable," he said gently. She paused. The room wasn't watching her. No one was pressuring her. The moment felt open, without expectation. So she placed the shaker on her chair and stood. She walked to the piano slowly, her steps quiet but not as hesitant as before. She sat down again on the worn stool. She rested her fingers on the keys for a moment, waiting for the scattered rhythm to guide her. Then she pressed a soft chord. The room responded, instantly not with silence. Not with surprise, but with a kind of collective breath. The rhythm softened as people listened. She played a simple melody light, gentle, almost playful. It wasn't emotional like before. It wasn't deep. It was warm, easy, and soft, like sunlight on a quiet morning. The group leader smiled brightly. "Beautiful," he said softly, continuing his rhythm, adjusting it to match her pace. Others followed. The tambourine picked up a gentle shake. Wooden sticks tapped lightly. Bells chimed. The room filled with a soothing blend of sound. For the first time in years, she played not alone, not for someone. Not for memories, but with others. The melody continued flowing through her fingers, shaping itself without effort. She added small lifts and turns, letting the music dance lightly across the keys. The group responded naturally, matching her energy. Children swayed. Adults smiled. Even those watching from the sides felt themselves relax, and she felt something bloom inside her. She belonged. Not because she was talented, not because people clapped, not because she played beautifully. She belonged because she was part of something. When the melody reached its natural end, she softened the final notes and lifted her hands slowly. The rhythm faded with her, and soon the room settled into a calm, warm quiet. People sighed happily. A few offered soft claps. The leader grinned at her. "You guided us," he said. "Thank you." She felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I just followed what you were doing," she whispered. "That's what guiding is sometimes," he replied. As the group disbanded, several people stopped to thank her. The little girl who had given her the shaker hugged her lightly. "You play like a story," she said. The young woman didn't know how to reply. She simply smiled, a real smile this time, as the hall began to empty. She stayed near the piano, touching the keys gently with the tip of her finger. No longer afraid, no longer shaking, the older woman who had given her tea approached quietly. "You looked happy," she said. I think I was," the young woman replied softly. "Are you coming again next week?" She hesitated, then nodded. "I think so." The woman's smile deepened. "Good. We'd love to have you." The young woman looked at the piano one last time before leaving. It no longer felt like a memory she needed to avoid. It felt like a door she had finally opened after years of keeping it locked, as she stepped outside into the cool evening air. She felt lighter than she had in a long time. The street was quiet, the sky painted with soft colors of the fading sun. She closed her eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. Something had changed, and she didn't know it yet, not fully, not deeply, but the small decision to sit at that old piano that afternoon was about to change her life in ways she never imagined. The day after her unexpected performance, the air around her felt different, even though she tried to move through life the same way she always had. She woke up early, pulled the curtains aside, and let the slow morning light slip into her room. Everything outside looked quiet, calm, and almost untouched. But inside her chest there was a small, restless feeling she couldn't explain. It was not fear, not excitement, not worried. Just something new, like a soft echo that hadn't found its shape yet. She sat on the edge of her bed for a long moment, letting her feet rest against the cool floor. Her hands, without meaning to, moved as if they were remembering the piano keys from the day before. She didn't smile, but something in her eyes softened. It was strange. She had spent years hiding her connection to music, guarding it like a small flame she didn't want the wind to touch. And now, after one small moment in front of strangers, that flame felt brighter. She didn't talk much at home, and that morning was no different. The house was quiet, peaceful, filled with familiar sounds, the distant hum of water running somewhere, the gentle clink of cups in the kitchen, the faint shifting of footsteps from room to room. When she passed by the living room, her father looked up from the table. He was reading like he always did in the morning, the same calm look on his face. He didn't say anything at first. He simply watched her walk by, the way he always noticed the small details no one else paid attention to. Then he spoke, his voice low and steady. "You played yesterday?" She stopped mid-step. She hadn't told him about it. She hadn't expected anyone to, She slowly turned, unsure how he knew. "Someone told me," he added as if reading her thoughts. "They said you played very well." Her face warmed slightly, but she didn't know what to say. Praise had never been something she knew how to react to. So she stood quietly, waiting. Her father set his cup down and leaned back a little in his chair. "Why didn't you tell me you wanted to play again?" he asked. She looked down at her hands. Wanting felt complicated. Music had been a big part of her childhood, something she once shared with someone she lost too early. She could still remember those evenings when the house felt full just because of sound, full of laughter. Full of singing, full of notes rising and falling like light bouncing off water. After that person was gone, the silence hurt more than any noise could. She never said that out loud. "I didn't know if I should." She finally answered. Her father's expression changed. Just a little, but she saw it. Something gentle. Something sad. Something proud. "If music is still inside you," he said softly, "you should let it breathe." She didn't reply. She simply nodded, because anything more felt too heavy to say. Later that day, when she walked toward school, the world felt slightly bigger. People weren't exactly staring at her, but something subtle had shifted. She caught a few glances, whispers, the kind that didn't feel unkind, just curious. Her quiet presence wasn't as invisible as it had been the week before. Inside the building, she moved the way she always did, walking along the edge of hallways, slipping between groups, never trying to take up more space than she needed. She reached her classroom and took her usual seat, but before she could settle in, one of her classmates turned around. "Hey," he said with a light smile. "We heard you played yesterday. That was you, right?" She blinked slowly, unsure whether to confirm or pretend she didn't know what he meant. But lying felt pointless. "Yes," she said quietly. His smile widened. "You were amazing." She felt a soft rush of embarrassment, the kind that made her shoulders pull in slightly. She didn't know how to respond, so she just gave a small nod. Another student leaned closer. "I didn't even know you played the piano." She didn't answer. She didn't know what to say. It wasn't that she didn't want to talk, she just wasn't used to people noticing her, let alone wanting to talk to her. The rest of the morning passed normally, but the feeling stayed with her, a quiet warmth that rested somewhere deep inside her chest. She tried to focus on the lessons, but her mind drifted often. Each time she saw her hands on the keys again, heard the soft echo of the chords filling the small room. She remembered how everything had gone silent for those few seconds before she played, and how everything changed right after. After school, she didn't go straight home. Instead, she walked toward the music room, unsure what she was looking for. The door was open, and the same old piano was sitting in the corner. Looking as worn and familiar as it had the day before, she stepped inside, closing the door gently behind her. The room felt different now that she was alone, quiet, but not the kind of quiet that felt empty. This was a warm quiet, like the pause before the start of a story. She walked to the piano and placed her hand on the wooden surface. It felt smooth, cool, and steady beneath her fingers. She sat down slowly, letting her body relax into the bench. Her fingers hovered over the keys, waiting, thinking. She took a breath, then pressed a single note. It rang out softly, filling the room in a small, steady wave. She played another note, then a third. Not a full song, not yet. Just pieces, fragments, sounds she remembered from long ago. After a few moments, she closed her eyes. Without planning to, she let her fingers move the way they wanted to. She wasn't performing. She wasn't practicing. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was just letting the music come, and it did. Soft at first. Slow, gentle, then brighter, clearer. Her hands moved naturally, almost without effort. She didn't think about whether it sounded right or wrong. She didn't think about who might hear it. She didn't think about anything except the feeling. The warmth that spread through her chest each time her fingers touched the keys. Minutes passed, maybe longer. Time didn't feel the same in that room. It stretched and softened until she couldn't tell where one moment ended and the next began. When she finally opened her eyes, She saw someone standing by the door. It was the same teacher who had heard her play the day before. He didn't step inside. He didn't speak right away. He stood quietly, listening as her final notes faded into the air. "You play from somewhere deep," finally said. She didn't know what that meant. She looked down at the keys. "I want you to consider something," he continued gently. "There's a small showcase coming up. Nothing big. Just students who want to share something they care about. I think you should play." She froze. A showcase, the idea felt too big, too loud, too much. She shook her head slightly. "I don't know. You don't have to decide today," the teacher said with a calm smile. "Just think about it." He left the room, leaving her alone again with the piano. Her hands were still resting on the keys, but her thoughts were moving in circles. She tried to imagine herself sitting in front of people again, not in a small room, but on a stage. She tried to imagine the lights, the silence, the waiting. It scared her, but it didn't scare her the way other things did. This was different. This fear wasn't stopping her. It was pulling her forward. She stayed in the room for a long time after that, not playing, just sitting. She let the idea settle in her chest, warm and strange. And then, very quietly, she whispered to herself, "Maybe." She woke earlier than usual on the day everything was supposed to come together. The sky outside her window looked pale, still waking up itself, with slow colors spreading across it like someone brushing soft strokes of paint. The world felt calm, but inside her, there was a quiet storm. Not the kind that pushed her to hide or shrink back, but a different kind of storm made of hope, worry, courage, and something she could not name yet. She sat up, pulling the blanket aside, and for a moment she didn't move. Her room looked the same as every other morning, simple, small, familiar. But she knew she wasn't the same anymore. Something about the last few days had shifted her, lifted her, pushed her gently toward a place she wasn't sure she ever expected to be. Her fingers curled slightly, as if reaching for piano keys that weren't there. It had become a habit now, something she didn't control. Her hands remembered things before her mind did. Maybe that's what music does. Maybe it teaches you how to feel before you learn how to understand. She stood, stretched slowly, and walked toward the small mirror near her door. Her hair was messy from sleep, her eyes soft with morning light. She looked like herself and not like herself at the same time. More awake, more connected, more open. Today was the showcase. She whispered the words to herself, testing how they felt inside her chest. They didn't echo with fear this time. They sat quietly, waiting. She ate breakfast with her father, though she could barely taste the food. Her father didn't speak much either, but the silence wasn't heavy. It felt like shared understanding. He kept glancing at her, not in a worried way, but in a way that told her he was proud. Proud of how far she had come. Proud of the courage she was trying so hard to hold. "You're going to be okay," he finally said. She nodded. She didn't know if she believed it entirely, but she wanted to. When she reached school, she followed the small stream of students heading toward the auditorium. Some carried instruments, violins, guitars, flutes. Others carried sheets of paper or small props for their acts. The air was filled with soft excitement, a mix of nerves and anticipation. Inside the auditorium, lights were dim because the crew was still setting things up on stage. She could hear soft chatter, laughter, the clattering of equipment being moved into place. She found an empty seat near the side of the room and sat quietly, holding her bag close to her. Beside her, a group of students were practicing harmonies for their performance. In front of her, someone was tuning their guitar. The notes warm and soft. She felt small in the large room, but not invisible the way she used to. People had begun to recognize her not because she spoke much, not because she asked for attention, but because of the way she played. The idea still felt strange. The teacher who invited her to perform walked over and gave her a reassuring smile. "The piano is all set for you," he said. "Whenever you're ready, come backstage. I'll walk you through everything." She nodded, grateful. Her heart beat faster. But not in a painful wet, was the steady beat of someone standing at the edge of something meaningful. For the next hour, she watched other students rehearse on stage. She listened to bits of music, poetry, small speeches, and soft melodies that filled the room. She admired the courage in each person's voice, the way they stepped into the light even with shaking hands. She didn't know if anyone here understood how hard it had been for her to say yes to this, how heavy the past had been, how deeply silence had lived inside her for so long. But she was here, and that mattered. Backstage, the lights felt warmer. The curtain felt heavier. The piano looked older and sturdier than the one in the small music room. But when she touched the keys, they felt familiar, like an old friend she hadn't seen in years. She sat on the bench for a moment, taking a slow breath. A few students stood nearby, waiting for their turn, whispering encouragement to each other. She felt their energy, their nervous laughter, their shared hope. Her father had taken the afternoon off to come watch. She knew he would be somewhere in the audience soon. The thought made her heart shake a little. The teacher stepped beside her. "You don't need to play something complicated," he said quietly. "Just play something that feels honest." She nodded. Honest. She could do that. Her name was called soft at first. Then clearer she stood. She walked toward the stage. The lights hit her before the sound did. They weren't harsh, just bright enough to blur the faces in the audience into soft shapes. She could feel her heart, her breath, a slight tremble in her fingers. She sat at the piano. For a moment she didn't move. The silence stretched, gentle but present. The audience waited. She placed her hands on the keys. Her fingers remembered, and she began. The first notes were soft, almost shy-like. She was introducing herself in a new language. The audience leaned in. The sound filled the room slowly, like warm light spreading across quiet water. She played a piece she had created silently in her mind over the past week, shaping it in small moments when no one was watching. It wasn't a full song. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. The melody grew gentle at first, then deeper. Her fingers moved with more confidence as each chord found its place. The middle section held a memory, a soft echo of the person she once played for as a child. She didn't force it. She let the emotion stay soft, not sharp, not painful. The audience stayed still. No one coughed. No one shifted loudly. The room held its breath. She reached the final part of the melody, the part that felt like stepping into sunlight after a long night. It was warm, hopeful, and full of something she didn't have a name for. Her hands lifted gently as the final chord faded. The silence that followed was warm, full, hold. Then the applause. It came not explosive, not overwhelming, but sincere, kind, real. She didn't smile broadly. She didn't bow deeply. She simply stood, gave a small nod, and walked backstage. Her chest felt light. Her eyes felt warm. Her hands were steady. When she stepped backstage, the teacher met her with a quiet nod of approval. "You did beautifully," he said. She didn't answer right away. She let herself breathe through the moment. She tried to take in everything, the soft echo of applause in the background, the faint hum of stage lights, the warm feeling inside her. She finally whispered, "Thank you." Then she walked toward the exit where the audience would eventually come out. Her father was waiting for her. He didn't rush toward her or overwhelm her with words. He simply stepped closer, looked at her with eyes full of something deeper than pride, and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You played with your heart," he said. She looked down, her throat tightening just a little. I tried," she whispered. "You did more than that." He squeezed her shoulder lightly, and for the first time in a long time, she let herself smile, soft, real. That night, when she returned home and sat on the edge of her bed again, the room felt different, bigger, somehow. Not because anything had changed inside it, but because something had changed inside her. She thought about the small music room, the worn piano, the soft chords that started everything. She thought about the moment she first touched the keys again, the moment she whispered maybe to herself. She thought about the stage, the light, the silence, the sound, and she understood something she hadn't understood before. Music wasn't something she lost. It was something waiting for her. She lay down slowly, letting the quiet settle around her. The storm inside her chest had softened, turning into something calm and steady. Tomorrow, she would go back to the music room tomorrow. She would play again, not because she had to, not because anyone expected her to, but because the music was hers, and she was ready to finally let it live.